May 11th, 2024, a remote village in Kugan, North Chola province. In the darkness before dawn, orange flames were blazing against the sky. An entire house was burning to the ground. The fire spread, the roof caved in. A woman stood there watching the flames. She made no move to pull out the fire. She didn't call 119. She didn't run. She just waited there and watched as the fire swallowed the building, watched the house collapse, watched knowing that a person was burning to death inside from beginning to end. When police arrived, they found the woman sitting near an outdoor bathroom in front of the house. She was heavily intoxicated. During questioning, she openly admitted that she had set the fire. The man who died inside was her boyfriend. They had been together for 5 years. Why did she sit there and watch her partner burn to death? Let's get into the story. The woman in our story, we will call her Susan. She was 43 years old at the time of the incident. Her childhood was not a happy one. Her father turned violent whenever he drank, and eventually her mother couldn't take it anymore and left. Susan and her younger siblings were left behind with their father. One family member described what it was like, saying there was a lot of fighting. Getting hit was just something what happened every other day. As kids, we went hungry so many times. We really grew up starving, growing up surrounded by violence and hunger. Home was never a safe or pleasant place for Susan. She started drinking early. Even as an adult, she struggled to hold down a steady job or maintain stable relationships. Her situation in life was always precarious. She must have wanted someone to watch out for her, someone who would be on her side, but for a long time she didn't really have anyone. Then in 2019, when Susan was in her late 30s, she met a man. He was a few years younger than her. At first he was kind. He treated her warmly in a way that she wasn't used to. For the first time in her life, she felt like she might have someone she could really lean on. But before long, his behaviour began to change. The walls started to close in. He'd tell her things like, don't talk to others, stay home, don't go out, don't wear skirts. He tried to control everything about her. If she pushed back, even slightly, he got angry, and eventually that anger turned physical. After the first time he hit her, he apologized. He said it would never happen again, but it did happen again. Once became twice, twice became 10 times, 10 times became too many times to count. The violence also kept escalating. It started with slaps, then punches to the face, then kicks, then choking. At some time, he started threatening her with a weapon. Susan tried to leave. She once fled to her father's house, but her boyfriend followed her there and caused a scene. According to her family, he didn't hit her at their place. He'd take her back to his place, have some drinks, and if something bothered him, that's when he'd go at her. And so Susan would end up back with him. She clearly couldn't run to her family. She had nowhere else to go, no money, and no one to turn to. Susan had no choice but to call the police. She was trying to stay alive. Officers would show up, and her boyfriend would calm right down once they were there. The police would treat it as a couple's quarrel rather than an incident of domestic violence and close the case on the spot. After they left, she says the beatings were worse. She was receiving punishments for reporting him. But she didn't give up. Every time he hit her, she called. Every time he choked her, she called. Every time he threatened her with a weapon, she called the police. Over 5 years, Susan called the police 31 times, but most of those calls ended with officers telling her boyfriend to settle down and then leaving. According to Susan, some officers even turned on her, saying, "We told you not to come to this place. Why do you keep coming back? This is what happens." She was the victim, but she was made to feel like she was the one doing something wrong. There was even more concerning movements. In some cases, where Susan's boyfriend was clearly the one doing the beating, the incident was logged as mutual assault. Experts say that in Korea, if the victim so much as raises a hand in response regardless of who is the aggressor, it is automatically classed as mutual. There had been reform attempts, but as of yet, nothing had succeeded, so abusers had learned to exploit this apparent legal loophole. They will beat someone and they say, "Go on, hit me back." They know that if it gets classed as mutual assault, they are likely to avoid punishment as both parties face potential persecution. And this makes victims especially vulnerable. But that's not the only issue. Under current laws, intimate partner violence is distinctive from domestic violence in that it can only be prosecuted if the victim press charges. This gives abusers leverage to pressure their victims into dropping the case. The abusers reach out constantly, sometimes enlisting friends and family to help, demand, plead with, or threaten the victim to withdraw the complaint. Sometimes that pressure is applied through physical abuse. So the system was not as helpful to Susan as it could have been. The police did take some steps to help her. They gave her a safety watch and increased patrols in the area, but that was about it. There was no separation order, no restraining order, no real enforcement keeping the abuser away from her, and the violence kept getting worse. At some point in 2022, Susan's boyfriend punched her repeatedly in the face. Her orbital bone fractured, the bone around her eye collapsed inwards, her entire face swelled severely. She was taken to the ICU. A family member described what she looked like. He'd got a strong right hand, so the whole side just got destroyed. The hospital said she suffered partial blindness. Then later, they said she might lose her vision entirely. The attending physician wrote that in her medical record, orbital fracture, possibility of death. So she could have died. Neighbors witnessed the aftermath. Someone took photos and reported the assault to the police. And this time her boyfriend was arrested. The court sentenced him to 6 months in prison. But those 6 months passed quickly. The moment he got out, he came looking for Susan again. He attacked her again. This time, he received 4 months for trespassing and refusing to leave. And the same thing followed this second release from prison. He came back, and it was worse. In 2023, he was arrested again on aggravated assault charges and sentenced to 1 year behind bars. The court's written opinion detailed the level of his crimes. When she tried to leave, he became enraged, unleashed a torrent of profanity, and choked her. While choking her, he struck her face and head approximately 10 times with his fist, causing severe swelling across her face. On a separate occasion, following an argument, he choked her again, hit her in the head, then retrieved a weapon, pressed it against her throat, scratched her right arm, and burnt 3 spots on her stomach with a lit cigarette. Just 1 year, that was the sentence for all of that. Susan finally felt like she could breathe. She had at least 1 year of safety, but that year went faster than she expected. In May 2024, he got out. Just 1 week after his release, he of course contacted Susan and asked to meet. He said he wanted to apologize. She wanted to say no, but she was scared. She later told investigators she was afraid that if she refused, he might go after her father. So she went to her boyfriend's place, and that was a huge mistake. Susan regretted the decision the moment she arrived. There was no apology. According to the court documents, as soon as he saw her, he started hitting her, blaming her for sending him to prison. It was as if he was releasing a year's worth of rage, and it was worse than anything she had suffered before. He beat her up until her chin split open. Then he choked her until she couldn't breathe. She thought she was going to die. He let go. She collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. She wanted to call the police, but he had taken her phone. She wanted to run, but her body had beaten up so badly she barely could move. Hours passed. He kept drinking, and then, drunk and exhausted, he fell asleep. He spread out on a blanket on the floor and started snoring. Susan watched him. The same person who had just beaten her half to death was sleeping like a baby. She was swollen all over, blood running from her chin, and he was fast asleep without care in the world. She later told investigators, "He beat me like he was going to kill me and then just fell right asleep. That made me furious." Her eyes landed on a lighter. He left it out after smoking. There was a blanket right next to it. She told police, "I waited until he was asleep and then I set the fire. It caught. At first it was just a small flame at the edge of the blanket and it spread slowly. He didn't wake up, he was too drunk." Susan walked outside. She sat down near the outside bathroom in front of the house and she watched the fire grow. Flames shot out the window. They reached the roof. The whole house began to burn. She didn't call 119. She didn't leave. She stayed and watched until it was over. Later, an investigator asked her, "Why didn't you report it? Why did you just sit there and watch?" She answered, "Because that fire couldn't be allowed to go out. If it had gone out, I would have been the one who died." Susan was arrested at the scene. When police arrived, she was heavily intoxicated. She immediately admitted to setting the fire. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't try to make excuses. Prosecutors charged her with arson resulting in death. She wasn't charged with murder because she directly hadn't killed him. The charge was specific to causing death through arson. The first trial began. Her defense argued that she acted in self-defense. she had endured 5 years of abuse. That same night, she had nearly been choked to death. Her phone had been taken from her, leaving her with no way to call for help. Given all that, setting the fire was the only option she had to protect herself. But the court rejected the argument. The reasoning was that her boyfriend was asleep when she set the fire, meaning there was no active, immediate threat to her life at that moment. Without an immediate threat, the court said self-defense doesn't apply. The court also concluded that Susan must have harbored deep resentment from suffering years of abuse and noted that she had been in a very aggravated emotional state from the beating earlier that night. The court used this as evidence that she had acted with the intent to kill. Her sentence was handed 12 years. Susan broke down in the courtroom. She had suffered at the hands of her boyfriend for 5 years, and she was about to suffer at the hands of the justice system for another 12 years. Once word got out, women advocacy began to mobilize. 34 organizations across the world formed a joint task force. A new legal team was assembled. A second trial was held. The new defense team requested a psychological evaluation. The results showed that Susan was in extreme fragile mental state due to the prolonged abuse she had suffered. The court acknowledged that years of abuse had left her genuinely fearing for her life. It found that she acted according to the belief that it was the only way to end her suffering and reduce her sentence not by much. Her new sentence was 10 years. But the claim of self-defense was still rejected for the same reason. Her boyfriend had been asleep, so there was no immediate threat at the time. The court also said it was difficult to conclude that killing him was the only way for her to escape his abuse. The Supreme Court upheld the ruling. The 10-year sentence was final. After the ruling was finalized, critics argued that the courts have fundamentally failed to understand the dynamics of intimate partner violence. There was also concern that the threshold for self-defense had been interpreted far too narrowly. Under current standards, self-defense requires an immediate ongoing threat, and the response must be proportionate to what's happening in that moment. Those are called the proportional requirements, but intimate partner violence doesn't work that way. Even when an abuser is asleep, the victim isn't free from fear. She knows what's going to happen when he wakes up. She's going to get beaten again. She knows that if she runs, he will come after her. And another troubling detail emerged during the reporting process. Susan's boyfriend had 3 prior convictions for assaulting Susan: the 2022 orbital fracture beating, the trespassing charge, and the 2023 aggravated assault, but only the 3rd conviction was present to the court during Susan's trial. The other 2 court records were never submitted by the prosecution or by the defense. The orbital fracture case in particular was severe enough the hospital records noted the possibility of death. Had that been presented before the court, the outcome might have been different. The full record of the repeated and brutal history of his abuse was never put in front of the judge. Susan's case is just one of many. In 2025 alone, there were 16,339 reported cases of stalking and intimate partner violence in South Korea. Police requested arrest warrants in just 516 of those cases. Courts actually issued warrants in only 165. That's roughly 1% of reported cases. In other words, when a victim of intimate partner violence calls the police, there is about 1 in 100 chance the abuser will actually be arrested. In the other 99 cases, the incident gets closed on the spot and the abuser is released, or the victim is pressured into withdrawing the complaint. There is no specific law in South Korea addressing intimate partner violence. The domestic violence law technically covers common law couples, but is limited to family members. The stalking law focuses specifically on the stalking behavior because there is no consensus on how broadly to define intimate partner violence. Legislation has stalled. In August 2025, the coalition held a press conference in front of presidential office and formally submitted a request for Susan to be included in the August 15 Liberal Day special pardon, calling it the minimum measure by which the state can acknowledge its failings. The group said, "Does it make any sense that a woman who suffered horrific dating violence is served 10 years? She called the police 31 times and was never protected. She had no choice but to set the fire to survive. The police who ignored her calls and the judges who handed the lenient sentence should be held accountable." The pardon that year was granted to over 2,000 people, mostly political figures, and Susan was not included. Susan is still in prison serving her 10-year sentence. But the fight is not over. Advocacy groups launched a new 10,000 signature petition drive in early March 2026, with the collected signatures to be formally delivered to the presidential office, and the campaign is still active. In such cases, many people ask why she didn't leave. Why didn't she break up with him? why she got involved with someone like that in the first place. Experts push back on that framing. They say our society as a whole has very low awareness of the real gravity of the situation. In Korea in 2025, at least 137 women were killed by family members or partners, meaning one woman lost her life at the hands of someone they knew very well every 2 to 3 days. Every time one of these cases happens, the whole country erupts in outrage, and yet the tragedy keeps repeating. Susan did try to leave. She went to her father's house. He followed her. She called the police 31 times and nothing changed. The man went to prison 3 times and came out each time more dangerous than before. Did she really have a choice? What she did was a crime. There is no getting around that. But who drove her to that point? Can a society that ignored over 30 calls for help walk away from this without any accountability? That's the question I leave with you. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and subscribe to Crime Flux, and we'll see you in the next one.